Dead Scared Entertainment takes pleasure in presenting Verda Darano, a journey into the phantasmagoric lands of folklore, literature, theater, and film. In the centuries-old tradition of the Romani people, we bring to you stories of superstition, fantasy, and adventure. There's no turning back. The Verda approaches.
Latchi Ratyi Miro Amal. Good evening, friend. I'm as Makalai. Believe it or not, this trip tonight was inevitable, unavoidable. You may even say, destined. Where are we heading? Listen closely. There is a cave far from the tried and true paths we frequent. Its fathoms reach deep into the earth, a place where no man or beast dares to venture. There is someone we must meet there, an outcast among outcasts. Very few, a very heinous few, can surpass the horrors our friend is capable of. Tonight, we will sit down, and as candles flicker and beating wings swoop and circle us, listen to the tales from a monster among men. Brace yourself. There is no turning back once we enter this abyss of abominations. Yet don't let its adornments fool you. Every shadow casted by each glistening gold and silver antiquity is no mere absence of light. It is a creature, a friend of his, a predator of yours. I can feel you shudder. Your fear is fruitless, Miro Amal. Your doom is written in blood on the stone of this chasm.
Latchi Ratyi Dead Scared Entertainment fans. Today, we have our very last episode of Season 2 of Verda Darano, which I cannot thank all of you enough for tuning in every Tuesday since September 20th with us. It is now Halloween. Halloween is here.
We waited.
We have waited
so
long. And we hope you enjoyed a lot of our content that we have put out there for you guys. We worked very, very hard these past couple months to give you guys our authentic and coolest creations. So, without further ado, I'd like to introduce you to our final episode's guest. It's my brother, Piers Horvat.
Right. Let's do that one again. You sound like you gotta put a little bit of excitement in it. Yes, that's what you need. You need it, like with that, and you have to really thank you so much. We appreciate it from the bottom of our black hearts. Have something, have some fun, some character in it, you know?
Well, that's not me.
I know it's not, but you have to get people interested and excited. We get it. You're like this dainty little pretty thing. Get out. That's how you make yourself. That's how you make yourself. You gotta have expression. You have to make people want to listen to these things. This is entertainment. I'm trying to make you better. That's all I'm trying to do here. Go ahead, try again.
Latchi Ratyi Dead Scared Entertainment fans. Today is our very last episode of Season 2 of Verda Darano. And today we have none other than the co-founder of Dead Scared Entertainment. Some of you might know him. Some of you may not. It's better if you don't.
Got that right.
Anyways, his name is Paris. It's my brother. How you doing, Paris?
Terrible.
Good. All right. That's the end. Let's go.
Perfect. Thank you all for tuning in. But I can't
That'll
believe
be
it.
a good one to edit.
No, we're keeping this one.
Yeah.
We're rolling with this one. I'm tired. But really, thank you all so much for taking the time out to listen to every episode of Verda Darano. And if you've only listened to a couple, great. Thanks for tuning in for just a few. I hope you like the taste that you got of us. Hope you like our flavor. If not, well, hey, we got some other stuff coming towards you, and I hope you'll enjoy that too. But yeah, I guess today the tables have been turned and it's in my direction. So let's just cross our fingers that the house doesn't explode.
Yeah. Okay. Let's start off just as every other episode. Where did you grow up? And what was your experience like growing up, Rom? Tell us about the positives, negatives, and everything in between.
Well, you should know. All right. Yeah. Well, as a good chunk of our listeners know, I was born in Dearborn, Michigan.
By the river.
Yeah. In a caravan. We were running away from the Shelbys. Go ahead. Nah, that's a different story. No, I grew up in Dearborn, Michigan, or I was born there. And the majority of my life, I've lived in Chicago, Illinois. Growing up was different because, number one, I was constantly back and forth between Dearborn and Chicago. Chicago, although all my stuff was here, they had Mr. Beef's here and the Agostinos. It never really felt 100% like home. It never really had that touch like how when I was back in Dearborn. I guess the city life was something that never really appealed to me until I got older. But growing up was bittersweet because you lived with a secret, essentially. A secret that you had no choice but to keep. And that secret was that you were Rom. Going to school, I did not tell anybody. That was something that was told to me from day one, or even before I was in school. You can't let people know that you're Rom. But yet we spoke Romanes at home. There was Roma music on all the time. Django Reinhardt was on constantly. Birelli Lagren, Stokala Rosenberg, Flora Niculescu, and then that's just a few names, and just that's in the realm of gypsy jazz. But then you have like Boros Lajos, you have Vorush Kalman, Shandor Lakatos, and Yaroka Shandor, people like that, and the food, and constantly growing up, and you remember this too, our house was never empty. Rarely was it. Both sides of the family were constantly around. There was times where we had family even living with us. And the one thing that helped me make sense of it all was watching monster movies growing up. Now, this is something a lot of people don't know, but maybe you'll relate. This is why I think a lot of Roma like horror, because from young we're told to keep our culture and our heritage a secret, because the people wouldn't accept us. The people wouldn't want to be around us. They'd be afraid. They wouldn't want to deal with us. They would chase us down. They would want to, in some ways, if they really thought something was going on, call the police on us or something, whatever that may be. And the only other times you ever hear about something or people being treated the same way was in monster films. Really, it was. And At school, I went to a mixture of schools. I went to private and public schools. And in specific, like in public school, where we went down the street from us, Raquel and I were a handful of, like, of the only quote unquote white kids of the that was in the school. The rest were all Hispanic, or yeah, just the majority was Hispanic, and we didn't even have like a lot of African American friends. None. Practically maybe one or two every now and then.
Not only friends, just people there
And
in general.
just there in general.
Yeah.
And it's funny because we always hear about the opposite, where the majority, when you talk about the majority of people being white, sort of Western European type people, essentially, very much of the British or, Northern type of, sort of types that you would be talking about. But it was the complete opposite for us, because the area that we grew up in was more or less gang territory too, on top of it, here in Chicago. And it made living as a Rom very difficult to balance growing up, because I wanted to have pride in my culture. I wanted to have pride in my family, in my music, in my language, in my traditions, in my superstitions, but I couldn't have it because the second I would leave the door, all that had to be put in my pocket. Otherwise, something was going to happen. Never knew what it was, but something was going to happen. People were going to come after me. But it was fun. The parties were always gigantic. There was never, honestly, there was very little times where the music wasn't blasting. People weren't dancing. People weren't drinking. It was constantly just nothing but good times. And I don't know if you remember the house on Southport. Do you remember going to our great Aunt Aggie's house? Well, our Aunt Julie was living there at the time still.
Yes.
Do you remember? And she was living in the garden apartment.
Mm-hmm.
And we would go with the steps. Yeah. We used to watch Dragon Tales with Sarah and have McDonald's. Yeah. We experienced the literal tail end of what was left of the Roma that lived on Southport, which was at a time in our family's history was a major neighborhood for the Roma in general. And we caught the literal last end of that. There was like maybe one or two parties that we went to, and otherwise just going to stay with Julie and Sarah and Damien and hang out with them. That was basically it. After that, it was done. But speaking of memory, and you and I both should remember this, because this one, everybody, we even still talk about this Halloween today. Mm-hmm. Remember when we all went trick-or-treating?
Yeah.
You were dressed up, what was it, an angel or a unicorn?
I was a unicorn, but it was just a coat.
It was just a coat.
A unicorn coat.
And you had wings on.
It had like a hood that it had like wings on it with a hood that was the unicorn's head.
Yeah.
I was warm, it was comfortable.
It was.
And you were Dracula.
Of course. I remember, and this is when...
That was actually a very fun Halloween.
That was a Halloween that no one, whoever is listening to this, I know for a fact, that was there. If you are listening to it, hi.
We miss you guys.
We aren't gonna forget, ever. But I don't know if you remember this, but we went into like this little like apartment cul-de-sac, kind of like a courtyard. And waiting on one of the steps was this group of older people, probably our age now. They were all dressed up like vampires, like truly, like really did up like real good. And I remember going up to them, and I was a little afraid. I'll admit I was a little afraid because at that time, the only things that I saw was stuff on TV, essentially. what really made me different from everybody, even outside of the Roma and the Gaja, was how much I loved bats. And this is all going to kind of come full circle in a little bit as it is as I speak. But from what my mother said was 2 years old, my mother and father said 2 years old, I constantly was talking about them, drawing them. Once I was able to read, I was asking for books about them. I was, once the internet was a thing, because there was a time when that wasn't a thing for our age, looking them up online constantly. And then as I got older, learned what emails were, I was contacting people about working in bat conservation, being a field biologist. And for the longest, that was my path. That was before I really knew what it was to really step into my culture and my heritage. I only knew what was allowed in the house, what was kind of like what was going on in the house. A lot of the negatives of being a Rom were kind of kept away from me and Raquel for the longest, with good reason. So it allowed us to foster a love for school, a love for learning, big imaginations. We were constantly putting on shows for our Babam Papu. We were constantly telling spooky stories and watching movies about everything, really, always constantly movies, but we really enjoyed all the Halloween stuff. How many VHSs we got?
But I will like to add, the reason why we were able to kind of be hid away from all those negatives is because the majority of our family, after Southport, everybody left.
Yeah.
Essentially, we were here
Alone.
and the majority of our family were in Detroit.
Yeah.
So we'd see them for the summers, and then we'd come back to Chicago, and it would be, all right, time for school.
And just doing it like that.
Yeah.
And just being nice little white kids.
White presenting.
White presenting, there you go. But yeah.
Well, I will ask you this, though.
What?
Do you feel like being white and light complected, has that altered people's views about you when you meet them, when you foster relationships with them? Has people's perception of you changed once they found out who you were or got to know you a bit more after just taking a glance at you?
So you mean essentially, did them just looking at me for face value, then
Yes.
learning I'm Rom, did that change the way they looked at me?
Yes.
Well, so you're talking later on in life, because a lot of people didn't know. I didn't tell anyone I was Rom until I was going to St. Andrew's School. And the first person I told was my best friend. And I was so nervous about it. It was a gym class. We were doing the mile run.
Ew.
Do you remember that? The President's Challenge thing?
Yeah, awful.
I remember that day. And I don't know how
Nightmares.
right? I don't know how the subject came up, but I told him. And he knew that I was nervous about it. So he was joking about it. And he screamed it real loud, "Pierce is gypsy." And nobody paid attention. And I'm dying. I was shitting my pants. But then I noticed nobody really bothered to care about that. But later on in life, it depends, because see, it's more or less just the way I present myself. Is I'm not just kind of I don't know, Joe with the trust fund, or just some type of just average white guy. People could look at me and know that I have culture behind me. They could tell just by the way I talk. I pass for Italian, I pass for Greek. I've gotten Puerto Rican before. I've gotten Mexican. I'm trying to think of what else. Obviously, a lot of people, if they are a little bit a little like aware. They're like, oh, well, maybe he's Romanian. I've gotten mistaken for Jewish as well. That's a funny story. I'll mention
Yeah,
that
it's
later.
that big ass nose of yours there.
Yeah.
That thing in the middle of your face.
But yeah.
But it's okay. We could throw for the noses because
That's fine.
everybody in our entire family has
We all got the big noses.
big noses.
Yeah. The more juki to have.
Ew.
So back to the story about me growing up. So because of how much I loved bats and how involved I was and how much I knew from young that I was going to work with bats, and I used to call myself a bat doctor. I was going to be a bat doctor, and I was making bat doctor kits and all these different things. And I was telling my friends and my teachers all about the importance of installing bat houses around your house and how it's important to plant certain flowers in your garden so they would attract certain bugs that bats love to eat. Going nuts about buying a bat detector. My God, that was nothing but trouble. That really was, I remember. Because they were expensive at the time. You couldn't get one for under $150, $200. You couldn't get one. Now you could get one for $30. Technology. And because of that, it made things...
When you were bad, Mom would say, I'm breaking the bat.
Yeah, and you know what? It did break. It did break, and I can't find that for the world. I can't find that bat detector.
It was that silver thing.
No, it was.
Yeah, it was big like that.
It was the white box with the little black note in the middle.
Yes.
Remember that one?
Yeah.
That was the official one. But I remember in particular the one thing about growing up was that my father was very much open to how passionate I was about bats. And because of that, when he would see the Roma on parties or get-togethers, he was very expressive of, oh, well, my son is very passionate about science and animals. In particular, he wants to work with bats. So the Roma would approach me as a young kid and they would ask me, they'd ask me questions and they'd say, well, aren't you afraid? I couldn't picture that. Yeah, look, this little boy, how great. Yeah, mind you, laughing their asses off. And I get it. Some of them were thoroughly interested in the fact that I was able to rattle off like facts about them. But then there was some where looking back and thinking about it, it was genuinely, they were like trying to like make fun of the fact that I was so nerdy about them and that I was really passionate about it because it's different. Because a lot of Roma were, if it wasn't in Goodfellas and The Godfather or Scarface, they didn't really want to show their sons or daughters what was going on. And as bold of a statement that is to say, it's really true. If you really look at the way that the majority of the Roma dress, the way that they act, they talk, how they carry themselves, and what they kind of put up on a pedestal in life, it's the majority of things from like gangster films, because those were people that came from nothing, from small time living, who eventually came into power in cities. And that's what the Roma wanted. And it was what they were involved in too. As musicians, seeing that lifestyle and working with a lot of the gangstera, and it's what it was. But then here comes this little nerdy boy who's telling people that a small brown bat could eat up to 600 mosquito-sized insects in an hour, or bat guano is a great natural fertilizer and stuff like that. So even among the Roma, even among the outcasts, I felt like an outcast. But then eventually I really started to foster my love for music when I was about 7 or 8. About 6 years old. My first instrument was guitar. I wanted to be Django Reinhardt. I wanted to be Rally Lagren. And I was taking guitar, but then something hit me. I can't remember. It was our great aunt's funeral in Dearborn. It was during the winter. I don't know if you remember this. I remember listening to, as the people know them, Billy Rose and Johnny Ziga, or who we call him, Johnny Smiles. I heard them playing during the funeral, and some of the other men playing the traditional march and some of the other traditional hagatos that we played during our funerals. And just listening to Johnny play and these other violinists, the Labutari, it just hit me in such a way, and I knew from that point on, I love guitar. Eventually I'd come back to it, but I knew violin was for me. And through the violin and through drawing, I was able to essentially start picking up, a little bit of some recognition. I started making more friends at school because I was drawing them Batman comics and all different things like that, and cars and cartoons. And then eventually, when the Roma found out that I was playing violin and I was learning to play, the first time I played among the Roma was for our Baba Vivian's funeral. And I was so afraid, but again, full circle. I played with Billy Rose and Johnny Ziga on her funeral, and sure enough, from then, it was a complete trial by fire. I constantly am being asked to play on weddings, play on funerals. Even when I just come in town to Dearborn, it's like a sin if I don't carry the violin on my hip. Even when they come out of town from Chicago, or even if I'm just going to sit by somebody's house for some cake and coffee. And just growing up, I realized so much was coming together, and I just had a curiosity about the culture, and I had a curiosity about our people and our history, and I just found out how much everything I liked all kind of stemmed together, and it all meshed together, and the center point of it all was bats. The idea of bats being an unknown, creepy creature. Well, when you look at how the Roma are treated in today's society, it's very similar. Up until recently, we didn't have as much pride in our culture as we do now. We weren't as vocal about our culture around the world as we are now. At least I didn't know about it at the time. But essentially, I was able to draw similarities between the two. And add to that the fact that the only time I saw Roma in films in general was in monster movies. It just all came full circle. Everything came together, and I just knew something was there. I just didn't know what. Until January of 2020, it all clicked. And I said, well, I finished school at DePaul University studying animation. I graduated in 2018, and I know I'm skipping over a lot, but at the same time, everything came full circle, and that was me growing up.
So speaking of bats, what was Halloween like growing up? I know you mentioned a story. What's your favorite Halloween memory?
So we touched base on one in particular, but the other one that kind of pops in my head is there was a Halloween. We went to one of the rich neighborhoods here in Chicago, and there was a guy who had a bunch of classic horror memorabilia all over his home, and he actually had us walk through because I saw in the corner he had a life-size stand-up of Bela, and I have a picture of me standing next to him somewhere. Maybe we'll post that too.
Yeah.
Yeah, we'll find it. I think I got it somewhere. And every Halloween I was Dracula or Batman, one of the two. I can't think of there's very few times during Halloween that
You
I
were a
wasn't.
bat.
I was once.
You did that paper mache mask thing.
I did. Yeah, that's right. That was
The wings and
it was for a
stuff?
competition.
Yeah.
Yep, it was for a competition. So yeah, bats, Batman, Dracula, it all fit right into that pocket. And I was one of those kids that, well, it was always cold every year, so you had to put a jacket on, and it ruined the costume. You had a big puffy jacket on over a great looking costume. And Bubba would do my makeup all the time. I would try to do it when I was younger, but it would look awful. But I always loved going to trick or treat, and even though I was frigid cold, knocking on the doors, what I would do is what I was looking forward to actually was going to eat after we would trick or treat. We'd go to Chili's, we would go to McDonald's, or we'd order pizza and bring it home, and then we watch spooky movies, like some kind of spooky movie, and we would eat our candy and then knock out. And another thing about Halloween was that I always, if I was dressing up as Dracula or Batman, I had to get the costumes. I couldn't do no half-ass, quick something. I needed it straight from Party City, because back then they didn't have Spirit Halloween. Everything was Party City. You had to go there, wait in the big lines and everything, and the place smelled like feet. But I always loved going past all the makeup, like the special effects makeup stuff, and they had a little TV set up where they show you how to make the makeup and stuff. But that time of year was always my favorite, because it was the one time of year where I could walk down the street or in a store and I constantly saw bats. And forever it was and forever it will be. It's just it's a part of me to kind of live in this world without having bats a part of my life. I'm not living at that point. But yeah, Halloween was always the best, truly the best.
What's shaking, OVD fans? This is Pierce Horvat, co-founder of Dead Scared Entertainment. Raquel and I are so glad to have you listening to each and every episode of Verda Darano, and we'd greatly appreciate it if you'd give us a 5-star rating and leave a positive review on whatever platform you tune in from. This will help us reach more fantastic fans just like you and make the shadows just that much more friendly. We put a lot of effort into this, and all our content, including drawing videos, true paranormal experiences, and even more, is all accessible at deadscaredentertainment.com. And if you'd like to reach us through the ether and contact us regarding content ideas, general questions, or just to say hello from the other side, slither or swoop your way over to the Contact Us page on deadscaredentertainment.com. Thank you for listening. And now, back to your favorite bone-chilling broadcast, O Verda Darano.
So speaking of Halloween and growing up, what is your favorite scary movie? And what scared you the most?
So, growing up, I could not do contemporary type horror films. So growing up, that was late 90s, early 2000s. So anything that was slasher, anything that was kind of coming out at the time. I remember, I don't know if you remember this, but there was one St. Patrick's Day, and I think it was on Svengoolie, or it was on something along those lines, or it was maybe on BET. But they were playing one of the Leprechaun movies, and I caught a glimpse of it for long enough. Scared the shit out of me. And then I remember seeing parts of Chucky during Halloween time. Scared me royally.
You were always scared of the dummy from the Goosebumps.
Oh, yeah. So that's a whole nother thing. So we had Goosebumps because they knew that I like spooky stuff, but they figured, well, we can't let him watch rated R things. He's a little boy, so we'll put on Goosebumps. Yeah. So what I found scary was The Night of the Living Dummy. Yoy. That was, Slappy.
Slappy.
That's his name, Slappy.
And Papu used to call him
Snappy.
Snappy.
And Clappy.
Clappy.
He'd say Clappy's coming.
Yeah. Yeah.
I don't know if you remember the one about the werewolves.
Yeah.
You remember that one?
Yeah.
One of the parts that still stick in my head was the fact that there was a part towards the end where the people are like zombies and they're clawing at the main character saying, give us our skins, give us our skins. And it was just so intense for a kid's program. So intense. And then there was the one about the amusement park. Look how I'm blanking on the names of all these. That's how long ago it's been since I watched them. And there was a ride where they had...
that was my favorite one.
They put you in a coffin.
Yeah.
And they locked the lid. And there was all spiders in the coffin.
Well, you know what? Actually, too, the majority of movies that Bubba would put on for us was the Halloween movies.
Because that's all we wanted to watch. Maybe not you, but me.
Yeah, no, I was going to say, not me, but...
Well, remember that one remember we used to get like the Alvin and the Chipmunks, remember? There was the Alvin and the Chipmunks meet Frankenstein, then there's Alvin and Chipmunks meet the Wolfman. And then there was like, I don't know if you remember this one's real old. Do you remember a show called Monster Mash?
Yes.
That one too.
Yeah.
There was that one.
The movie, and it was in the orange thing.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Exactly. And then they had the Rugrats Halloween we had.
Yes. That was like a marathon with like a couple
all different
movies.
Rugrats.
Yeah.
No, it was all Rugrats.
It was it was the two different, I think, movies of it.
There was three episodes, I think there was on that one. But trying to think of what else. But
what is your favorite scary movie?
So that's what we're getting to. I was about to say. So growing up, I always loved Dracula because I would get glimpses of him on TV, or if I was looking up online, I didn't necessarily know how to get my hands on it until we went to Hollywood Video one day down the street from us. Not Blockbuster, Hollywood Video was cheaper and they had better candy too. But they didn't have toys like Blockbuster did. And I remember seeing it. And I cried like a dog to get it. I was so excited when we brought it home. And I was hooked from the start. Dracula 1931, starring Bela Lugosi and Edward Van Sloan, David Manners, Helen Chandler, Francis Dade. I'll name the whole cast. But because I remember when I was a kid, I used to memorize the credits. Didn't even know who the people were and whatever. I was so excited because it was just so creepy. And I remember watching the commercial that came before it. MCA Universal announces and all. It was great. But my first Universal monster film that I owned was not Dracula. It was Frankenstein Meets the Wolfman. I bought that at Walmart. There was a big display. And I remember I was going through all the films looking through it. And I couldn't find it for the world. I didn't want the Wolfman. I didn't want Frankenstein. I didn't want them. But I saw that one in particular. And the reason I bought that was because that was the only film that Bela was in. And I figured, well, hey, if I can't get him in Dracula, I might as well get him in Frankenstein Meets the Wolfman. And I love that film till today. There's certain parts of that film that still stick with me. The final scene where they're in the laboratory and the castle's destroyed. And then even in the middle of it, the scene of the festival of the new wine and the song Farola Faroli. And for those of you who recognize that tune, you hear it almost every single episode that we've been doing here on Verda Darano. But my favorite always was Dracula 1931. and just the Universal monsters in general. I made it a point to watch them all at some point in time, because yes, don't get me wrong, they're not as scary as the slashers and things of that nature, but they had an eeriness, they had a chill to them. They were the types of movies you can turn all the lights off for, and you can watch them by candlelight, and you felt like you were there in the film. But then again, that was me. I was always an old soul, so it made sense why those were my favorites, in particular Dracula 1931. But then even growing up, and once I was able to watch it, Mark of the Vampire was great. The Return of the Vampire, Abbott and Costello Meet Frankenstein. It would be really truly a sin if I didn't mention that movie, because if I had to put a movie that sums up you and in my style of storytelling and the types of movies we like, it's Abbott and Costello Meets Frankenstein.
I'd say that's my favorite scary movie because it's the only one that I've ever probably watched. Well, no, I've watched a lot that are all the way through, but I'm not a scary movie person. That's the only one that I can stand and genuinely got scared from as a kid.
I never was afraid of that movie. I just died laughing the whole way through. And all I could think about was, wow, how did they animate that bat transformation?
Yeah.
And 2, I want his cape. And 3, they're dogs for killing him off that way. But apparently there's a book that exists that continues the story. The Wolfman didn't die. Dracula didn't die. And there's a continuation of the return to that manor back out in Florida. Because mind you, that whole thing took place in Florida. So, and it was just so much fun. And another thing a lot of people don't know is that movie, the bat transformation, was done by Walter Lantz. Who's Walter Lantz? He's a creator of Woody Woodpecker. So Woody Woodpecker's team, at least the initial team that Universal had of animators at the time, they all were working on the bat transformation and a couple other animations that were throughout the film. But yeah, so my bread and butter, Universal monsters. Always been, always will be, for sure.
But do you believe in ghosts, witches, or werewolves or aliens?
All right, so I've been itching to tell these stories. So we're gonna start off mild. We're gonna start off mild, because I'm not big on spicy food, but I'm big on spicy, spooky stories. Long time ago, my best friend and I think he'd be okay. I think he wouldn't be mad if I mentioned his name. So my best friend Norman and I were on the lake. We were with a couple of other friends, celebrating a going away to college get together, and our other friend and his girlfriend at the time wanted some alone time to talk and whatever. So us two, being the goofy guys we are, just continued to talk as we usually do for hours and hours and hours on end. And we're walking through the dark on the lake. Now, some parts of the lake have like trees, some parts are just like those cement steps, some parts are like paths, like a wooded path, whatever. So we were kind of like in an area between like those cements and like where it would be like a wooded path. And I remember it was pitch black. No street lights around, nothing. We were lucky just enough to see in front of us because of the glow of the moon, literally, and the glow of the city itself. It had like this very dingy yellow haze. But I remember we were walking and just talking, and we both stopped and looked out into the lake, and we saw this gigantic green light that just filled this one particular area right above the lake. And he and I looked at each other and we're like, you see this, right? You see this big green light, right? How is this happening? We're freaking out. Now, this was at a time when, as much as we would have loved to do this, we weren't thinking to get our phones out. We weren't thinking to record this. Nobody was really using Snapchat the way that we use Snapchat now. And we were just in utter shock. And then here's what sold the both of us that we both saw an alien. Because you could ask him, and he'll say the same thing that I say to you guys now. It just was there, floating, kind of hovering in this one particular space. Then it just zoomed, going eastward off into the distance. But it wasn't like essentially where it's like it faded or something. No, this was like if you pressed the gas on a car and just flew. That's what this was like. So I definitely believe in aliens. There's too much proof on this planet to show that what was once primitive human beings suddenly became sentient enough to a point that within a matter of a few thousand years, we were capable of the amazing technological things that we have now. Come on. There had to have been something that at least initially started us off to some extent. And even if there was crossbreeding, who knows? Maybe that's what did it. The mutation in that sense. But I believe wholeheartedly there are aliens. How involved they are now, we don't know. They were smart enough to kind of get us started. They're probably smart enough to keep themselves pretty low key. Now, as for vampires and werewolves, I believe that there are vampires, but not in the sense of what we what we know in literature and pop culture. There are human beings, there are entities that feed on the energy of people, whether that be literal blood or just like their sort of their life force. Whatever you want to consider that, I feel that there are vampires that exist. And then there are some creepy people that actually get dressed up and do the whole 9 yards and are over here sanitizing cuts and drinking it up straight from that. Now, as enticing as that may sound, it's very involved and not as romantic as what you read in books and watch in films. But I do believe in that. Werewolves is a little bit more of a stretch, but I do feel that they were based on creatures and things that at a time were essentially either unexplainable or maybe perhaps did exist, and modern science was not around at the time to give us the proper explanation. But as for ghosts, because witches is such a very, like, in some ways fluid term, to not believe in witches, you'd be silly, because I've met so many witches, I've dated many witches. They're fun. I will say that they're fun. But ghosts, I wholeheartedly believe in. But as for ghosts, wholeheartedly believe in that, in other entities. Why? I've had many experience with them. So we'll start out with the ghosts. Raquel and I live in a very old house. It's the oldest house on the block, practically possibly the oldest house in the neighborhood. This was once a farm house. The rest of the area around here was dedicated to the farm. Our coach house happened to have been a stable at one time, and the owner of the home lived above the stable in a small little apartment, and we still have the radiator that he used. And there's still small remnants of what was left of the house that was over 120 some years old, going on 130. With that being said, with an old house like this, it has a lot of history. Like most people, what I've experienced was like kind of seeing things out of the corner of my eye or white flashes. But what really sold it for me was the fact that I was experiencing these things even outside of the home on random situations where I was completely sober, completely awake. And it was just crazy. There was one time I was passing, this was years ago, mind you, haven't seen her ever again. There was a woman in a big red dress, gigantic gown, and long black hair with a white face, but no face there. It was just a blank white space on her head. And she was in the corner, farthest from the door. And I've also seen, this one's scary, and I've told multiple people this one before. But I remember one night, this was I was in college at the time, and you can blame this on the all-nighters all you like, but this was a little too real for me to not believe. So our father has had a tendency that when he couldn't fall asleep, he would get up, watch some television, or just sit in the living room until he was ready to go back in the bedroom and fall asleep. So one night I was pulling an all-nighter, working on some animations, and I go look in the living room because it's a straight shot down from my room. You could look there and you could see the living room. And I saw what appeared to be my father standing in the living room and just like standing there, but all I saw was his shadow, and I felt as though he was looking at me. So I said, "Dad, what do you want? Dad, what's up? What's wrong?" No response. So I said it a little louder, "Dad, can't you hear me? What's wrong?" So then I hear from the bedroom, him out of his sleep, "What's wrong, Pierce? What's going on?" I look over to the bedroom, and then I look back to where he was supposed to be in the living room, and he was gone. It was completely gone. Then, and this is how I know, and it's funny when I hear people discount ghosts or the appearance of spirits or entities, because it's one thing for us to believe in it. It's another thing when we have animals sharing the experience. We just got Puddles, our little Bichon Frise. At the time, his name was Thunder, properly named Thunder.
No.
And yes, Thunder. That was the right name, the name that should have stuck. And he was having difficulties adjusting to the new environment. It was just a few days after we got him. And he would cry a lot at night. And I was going to school, or no, we got him during the summer, so I was staying up all night regardless. And what I would do is I would relax with him in the living room, and I'd play with him a little bit. And what would help him to fall asleep is I would play Dumbo, the soundtrack to Dumbo, or the soundtrack to Pinocchio. And at that time, he was already starting to fall asleep. So I shut the music off, and I was just holding him in my arms on the floor and just waiting for him to kind of like just remain asleep, and then I was going to go walk away. He was like at that point, and I thought, okay, that's fine and dandy. I'm just actually going to lay down right next to him. So that's what I did. Didn't move. He didn't stir. I was falling asleep. From nothing. Mind you, he's a puppy. He's maybe a few weeks old. Starts barking out of his sleep and looks towards the direction of the kitchen, which is, again, straight shot down hallway. You could see right through. Barking terrible. Now, he's a puppy, so you would think it'd be a nice little, like, kind of like almost like a chirpy bark. This was deep. This was like danger. This was like intruder alert. This was like now or never type bark coming from a little dog. And I'm thinking, why is he barking that direction? And he's standing right in a straight shot down, looking directly into the kitchen. Now, the way that we have our house situated is we have a doorway into the pantry that is covered by the fridge. So it creates essentially like a corner that you can turn into the pantry. And you could essentially hide behind the fridge. We did it multiple times during hide and seek, right? And I go look over to see what he's barking at, and I just see this man about 6 foot tall, just again a shadow, move from as if he was hiding kind of behind the fridge, moved completely behind the fridge. And I didn't go in my room that whole night. I didn't go back. I didn't head towards the kitchen. I stood in the living room and I knocked out on the couch. I said, nope, I'm not playing with that tonight. So you're probably thinking, well, that's nothing. That's whatever. It gets worse. So as college went on, and the more I really was diving into horror, I guess it's kind of like when you discover secrets from like the FBI or the CIA, you start to essentially draw some attention. At the time, I was doing a lot of research on mythology, on folklore, because of a lot of the shows that I watched. Like in particular, my favorite show at the time in college was The Chilling Adventures of Sabrina. A lot of my research was falling into the occult and witchcraft just because I was interested in telling stories along those lines, not because I was over here practicing to any extent, fully, completely devoted Catholic, but just interested in these things. But you can tell when that draws attention, essentially. That type of energy starts to fill in. And I remember the first night that I got sleep paralysis. Now, I've talked about this before to like a small extent on a video on our YouTube. Just type in Dead Scare Entertainment and look for The Paranormal with Pierce, episode 1, Is This Normal? And I remember the first time that I had this sleep paralysis, I woke up and I saw it looked like a young boy laying next to me, blacker than black. And I like to sleep in the complete dark because I learned that studies show sleeping in the complete dark gives you a more restful night's sleep. And it was just laying next to me. Nothing was going on, but I was frozen solid. Eventually, I kind of snapped out of it and went back to sleep. Then this is when I knew things were up and things were getting serious. One night, I was sleeping on my stomach. And I remember waking up from my sleep. I had this creaky bed. And I was laying down and just woke up from nothing. And my bed does not creak unless, in this one particular spot, unless you were sitting on it. Because a lot of people, usually if I have friends over or the family, they would sit on the edge of this bed, and that's why it would creak, because it was constantly had the pressure. Completely frozen. I felt the bed creak. And it wasn't as though I just heard it. I felt the pressure as if somebody was standing off the bed and decided to take a step onto it. And they stepped onto the bed. And I felt the pressure of each step as it sort of just like walked, and felt each impression of the footsteps coming closer and closer to me. And just hearing the bed just kind of creak, and it was unbelievable. Mind you, I'm frozen, completely frozen, can't move, can't see, because again, my room is pitch dark. And the next thing I know is it stops right about to the right side of my torso. Just stops, and I feel the bed kind of like cave in. And the next thing I know is I feel one cold foot on my back. And then I feel another cold foot on my back. And I feel as though the weight of whatever this thing was just sort of slowly descend, as though it was kneeling on me.
Oh my God.
And just hovering over me for a few seconds. And the only thing that made sense for me to do at the time was to pray to St. Michael. Sure enough, it worked. Because suddenly what was once that feeling of essentially this creature, this being, it felt like as though a grown man was on my back. And I felt the coldness of his feet. I felt like the toes. He was barefoot. And praying to St. Michael, it went away. Stood up for the rest of the night. Because, I mean, come on. Now, I only told a few people this before. You guys are getting an exclusive story from that. I've had multiple experiences with sleep paralysis. And it's crazy. But I even went to see a doctor about it. And they brushed it off and said, oh, this is just a result of increased stress. You know, you were in college, you're a business owner, this is what happens. No, you don't feel a man's feet on your back. I didn't ask for that. I didn't order it. I didn't get a Groupon for a masseuse to come to my house. No. So, our cousins recently got married. This was a couple years ago. And in the Romana tradition, we have two particular days during a wedding. One, the first day of the wedding is the actual ceremony and the reception, and everybody's dressed to the nines, and it's all pretty and 1,001 nice pictures and whatever. The next day, the second day as we call it, is a little less formal. People are still dressed very nicely, but it's more or less, it's about the partying, it's about drinking and celebrating with the family. It's a way to kind of show respect and to
For those who come out of town.
Exactly, to show respect for those who came out of town, to give them like a really good time. That's when the music's blasting, the liquor is flowing. It's a great time. And I remember on the way to the hall, we were passing through parts of West Dearborn and Dearborn Heights. I can't remember exactly where, to be honest. I was in the back seat of our one cousin's van. He was driving us all and just going through the streets. And he had his brights on. So anything that was coming on in the streets, because the street lights were out in Dearborn, they don't have street lights in certain areas. It's a suburb. Had his brights on. So anything that comes in that path, you're going to see, right? Well, and I asked everybody, and you guys all made me for crazy.
I was there?
Yes, you were there. This is why I'm shocked that you're afraid.
That's the point, because I know maybe I was there.
So there was a man, again, blacker than black, standing in the middle of the road. And it was about a block or so away I saw up ahead. And I saw this man like noticed that we were coming with the car. So he kind of stood as though he was like shocked, like with that sort of that deer in the headlights type of like body pose, that type of gesture. And then he ran to the left side of the street behind a tree. This blacker than black guy. And then as we passed the tree, I went to go look past the tree. Nothing was there. Now, I don't know about anybody who's listening, but I was sober. And at the time, I was fully alert.
Culvers.
We had Culvers. That's right. We had Culvers. And I purposely drank a little bit of coffee because I knew it was going to be a long night. So I was wide awake. I was cognizant. There was no chance of me just coming up with this. But there was an entity that was in the middle of the street, noticed that we were coming, and went out of the way and then disappeared into the ether. This last story that I'm going to tell you all happened to happen around Halloween time several years back. My girlfriend at the time came from out of town, and we wanted to spend some time together. We thought we were going to do a Halloween bar crawl, but it was actually really shitty. So we said, well, what are we going to do? So at the time, the basement where we're recording this now was in great shape. I was having friends over here constantly, having parties. I would sleep down here all the time too, even. It was just like this was my spot, essentially. And I said, well, I have some liquor left over from other parties. Let's go grab something to eat. We'll come back here. I'll see if I can hook up the TV. We'll watch some spooky movies, and then I'll take you back by your grandmother's. So we brought the food. We got some McDonald's, as one does. We were about to pour ourselves some drinks until she said, Pierce, I want to go.
I want to go too.
I said, oh, come on. What's wrong? What's going on? Your whole mood changed. It's like, yeah, of course the mood changed. He says, how old? She asked me how old the house was, and she asked me if I knew if anybody, like, who lived here before, and I told her I have really no clue. She says, well, there's a little girl down here about anywhere from like 13 to 16, maybe even younger. And she says, she doesn't want me here. She does not want me here. I said, what do you mean? Now, I've always had the sense, obviously, from the stories I've told you before. I've had the ability to sense when there was presences or if something was going to happen. Just like that, with those gut feelings, essentially, to have that sensitivity. I've noticed. I've always had that. For the longest, I felt this little girl's presence down here, but never really thought anything of it. I just figured, well, essentially, it's just one of the many other ghosts that live here. What am I going to do? But in this particular instance, she's like, Pierce, I want to go. And I said, why? What's wrong? She says, because she's all the way in the back. And she's looking at me like she wants to kill me. I go look over. And again, because the house is all basically set up the same way, one long hallway from one end to the other, I look down the hallway, it's completely black. So I don't see anything, essentially. But I know that the presence is there because it makes sense. The dots are connecting. She can obviously see this girl. So I don't put it past her because she, like myself, is very sensitive to things of this nature. And she said, Pierce, go close the back door because I can't look at her already. I said, why? She says, Pierce, she's contorting herself. She's on the floor and she's contorting her body in like strange ways. Her arms are twisting, her legs are twisting, and she's looking at me with black eyes and a smile. She looks completely unearthly right now. And that she was in a raggedy old dress from something from like maybe the early 1900s. She says, Pierce, please close this door or let me leave. I want to go now. I went over and I closed the door and I swore the girl out. As per Romana tradition, is we say that when there's unwelcome spirits around, we swear them out. You know, we cuss them out or however. Because I wonder if the Gajas, if they say swear too, because I hear they say curse or cast. Like, who cares? We swear them out. And for the rest of the night, she was on edge. So was I, because it's one thing if it's just like your normal average evening and something like that happens, but it's another when you have it happen on Halloween. Mind you, and I forgot to mention this during the story, she was not the only girl that I've brought here that's experienced this presence, essentially. I've had parties here. I've had jam sessions here. And a lot of times, girls who are very sensitive to the spiritual realm have all essentially felt very negative energies and felt very unwelcome down here because of the fact that this girl was present.
Do you believe Roma have a connection to the supernatural or energy beyond our realm?
Why, yes, I do. I really do. Why? Because I experienced it myself. From young, I've felt spirits and felt presences. I was able to, at times, when I was in areas that felt very very thick. The air was thick, or there was like electricity, like I explained in some of my stories, in the air. It's a feeling that it's hard to discount, and a lot of modern science likes to discount it. But then at the same time, there are studies that prove the ability of ESP, the ability of electromagnetic exchanges, energy exchanges, and things like that. So I totally believe in that ability. And I know that the Roma in particular are very sensitive people to that. I mean, it makes sense. And it's not like it's not a question of the chicken or the egg, which came first. I could tell you what came first. The Roma were always connected to some extent with the paranormal and with the unknown. Why? Because we were placed in the outskirts of living. So were we essentially in safe places? Were we always in scenarios in life where we were capable of living happily ever after, like the majority of society? No. We were placed in challenging areas, in places where essentially who knows what could have been there. We were residing in the woods, and who knows what lurked in the woods at those times. Nobody knows. So the Roma, who've experienced these things and who are sensitive to those things, eventually took their abilities to see the future, to sense good auras, bad auras, to in some ways be great healers. Because again, being in the woods, you have to be very resourceful with herbs and different plant life and such in order to survive. It only made sense why the Roma were then marked as witches and warlocks and spiritual people, because, well, we were privy to information that was unknown for most of society, because we had to learn the unknown, because normal society didn't want the things that we had to learn. We were forced to make do with the very little that society allowed us to have. So eventually that turned into reading tarot, reading tea leaves, palmistry, other forms of divination to some extent. And with that being said, some Roma made very profitable businesses off of it. A lot of famous politicians throughout the world see Romane fortune tellers and diviners to forecast their successes and downfalls. And a lot of them became successful business owners. And then there are some Roma, like our Roma, who, rather than going that route, were skilled tradesmen, blacksmiths, horse breeders, carpenters, and musicians, like our family in particular. So I totally believe that the Roma are blessed and gifted with this sense, because if we didn't have this, who knows where our people would be today.
I believe so as well.
You have no choice. You get to see it every damn day with me.
So what are your thoughts on the stereotypes and image Roma have in mass media? And how would you like to see Roma portrayed now and in the future?
Well, this question is a great question because of the fact that the way that Roma are portrayed now is within the realms of mystery, within the realms of thriller, horror, crime, and film noirs, and whatever you may have, essentially. The only reason I, growing up, didn't mind it was because of the fact that we were actually being featured as characters, as a part of a greater plot in Hollywood. But and again, this is a very strange way to look at this, and I know that there are a lot of Roma who would disagree with what I'm about to say. But I don't mind the fact that we're in this genre. Why? Because look at who we were in a good chunk of these films. We were the helpers. One thing that stuck with me, I forgot. I think it was Mr. Rogers. If I'm not mistaken. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I'm right. But there was, I'm paraphrasing a quote, essentially that when disaster strikes, make it a point to look for the helpers. Who is out in the world looking to help those that are going through hurt, who are going through terrible times? Focus on those people. Don't focus always on the tragedy. Try to elevate and root for those people that are out there in the hard times that are making things better. And look at Maleva in The Wolfman, and look at Esmeralda in The Hunchback of Notre Dame. Look at the many Roma within a lot of the horror films who were either innocent bystanders or people that were genuinely concerned. Just think back to Dracula. Now, it's the villagers were unnamed, essentially, the type of who were helping at the inn that Jonathan Harker happened upon before heading to the castle. We believe them to be Hungarians or at least Europeans, but I can tell you, based on the way that they acted and based on their presence in general throughout this, I would not be surprised if they were Roma as well. And one of the biggest things and one of the most chilling parts of the whole story was when he spoke to the Puri Juvi, the old woman, and she gave him her rosary and told him not to go to the castle. And just all those warnings from those people. And the fact that essentially, even if you look at Werner Herzog's Nosferatu, there's a whole scene in which Jonathan Huddle goes to sit with the Roma that were at the inn at the time. And there's a whole beautiful scene where the Roma are all sitting around a campfire. It's very, very picturesque, but very stereotypical Hollywood, because the majority of Roma today are dead afraid of the woods. They're also dead scared of bugs and fire and being outside. They all became extreme homebodies, which is, I understand, but part of me is like, well, I don't know why you're afraid. It's pretty outside. The air is fresher too. But there's a beautiful scene where it's all in Romanes, and it's in our particular Romanes, and I can understand it word for word. It's a beautiful scene, but essentially the whole scene is being told in Romanes to Jonathan Huddle that he shouldn't go there, that the castle is like a ghost castle, and that it's almost like a dream. But essentially, once you're there, you don't return. You don't come back. That evil lives there. And I don't mind the Roma being within that realm of the genre, as long as they aren't the villains. Let them be the helpers, because in a sense, it's a great connection to draw. Because if you look at the majority of monsters that we think of today in media, Frankenstein, the Wolfman, the creature from the Black Lagoon, the Phantom of the Opera, they're all victims of circumstance. You know, essentially either somebody came in and they encroached on their living and now they're either cursed, or they didn't ask for life as a monster or being an outcast. But they were essentially forced into that living and now have to battle against a world that now can't stand their existence. But then you have actual creatures like Dracula that are pure evil. And as charming and as wonderful as the character may be and has stood the test of time, it's always good to see the Roma are able to retain a sense of heroism within those plot lines. Even though their characters are very minor, I find them to have a bit of heart. They bring a little bit of heart to the films. What would I also like to see? I would like to see Roma in all genres of film, portrayed in sitcoms. I would love, because they're very funny people. They're very, very funny people. And a lot of them are natural actors, natural entertainers. I mean, it makes sense. We are all natural entertainers. That's how a lot of us make our money. Heck, you're listening to Dead Scared Entertainment. There you go. And Roma in action films, in comedies and dramas, I would just love to see the Roma expand their abilities in storytelling from just being that ominous character that forebodes death and destruction and despair and doom. So, yeah, I think there's a lot of room, and Dead Scared Entertainment is here to actually open those doors. But we have to start where we like them first, in the spooks.
If you can say one thing to our listeners, or Roma in particular, going forth in this journey of life, what would it be?
Well, to start off, I'd also like to thank our listeners from the bottom of at least my black heart for your patronage and your listening-ship and your viewership online as well and on social media, because without you all, we don't have a business. Without yous, we don't have an audience. And what I'm about to say connects directly to what I just mentioned. It is 2022. Our Roma, at least in America, were granted the ability to lead successful lives, to pursue educations, to pursue stable careers. And although we had to, in some cases, mask our culture, that isn't the case anymore. Cultures around the world are all speaking out in large numbers and with loud voices their pride, their love, and their passion for their heritage, their traditions, their beliefs. It is now our time. It is terrible that we have to still question whether or not we should let our kids tell their friends or their teachers at school that they're Rom. We should not have to be doing this in 2022 when we're still, even though there's still riots going on about race and about classism and all different inequities that we find in society. Now is our time. The past decade, I've seen a change, a dramatic change in the way that the Roma are viewed, at least on a very culturally or from a very secular point of view. And what I mean by that is a lot of my generation and even younger are more aware of the Romani people and are giving them the chance to take pride in their culture, whereas generations prior to us didn't give us that chance as much. So my message is to the Roma far and wide, and this can apply to our non-Roma listeners. Take pride in your culture. Don't just sit back and just let essentially your culture be a sticker on your chest. Actually invest some time into learning the language. Take some time to listen to the music. The music that we play is romantic. It is not sad, even though a good chunk of it is sad because of our history. Think of our music as in some ways mini time capsules of our experience throughout history. Because when you listen to the Romani music, I don't know about you, but I know that I can feel connected to generations past me. I feel pride. I feel love. I feel hurt. I feel despair. I feel a multitude of emotions, and for our Roma to deprive themselves and their children from this beautiful music, all because it's just connected to very sad memories, is a shame. It is a shame. Our Romana music does not exist only for sad occasions, or maybe the very few happy ones that we come across as well. There's so much that our culture offers. Our language is an ancient language, and the fact that it is still spoken today is an attest to the resilience of our people. And why should we let that die now? Because we all have iPhones and we're waiting for the newest rapper to come out with his new single. Mind you, everything that he's played all comes off of a little electronic box. What happened to our Romani people who were interested in taking up musicianship, and becoming technical musicians, fine performers and entertainers? I feel that now is our time as a people to take a look at our culture, look at what we were given, and try to bring back the positive traditions that we once had. The Roma are not all about just having a good time and dancing in circles and how the media portrays us as these wild and carefree people. We are people that are rooted in culture, and a culture of modesty, but yet at the same time a culture of beauty, a culture that takes pride in family, that takes pride in, and if you think about it, takes pride in practice. Because in order for you to become a great musician, whether you're reading the sheet music that's given to you, or you're learning it from somebody that's playing the song in front of you, that is a lot of dedication, discipline you have to have in order to become a fine musician. So we are a people of practice. We are a people of discipline in order to take up trades and to take up careers that are outside of school. We have the ability to become great people. And does that mean we have to get rid of our Romana heritage? No. So I say, take pride in being a Rom. Go and get educations. Become a person of today, but that does not mean you have to throw away your Romana identity. That should elevate your Romana identity, because that allows you to search for answers. It allows you to draw connections within the language. It allows you to think comprehensively in ways that will give you a broader scope of existence in general. So now is our time. My message to the greater expanse of humankind, but in particular our Romani people, is now is our time to take the best of our culture and the best of living the modern lives that we all lead now, and bring them both together. Because, hey, every other culture is doing it. Why can't we? Why do we have to be stuck in the same sort of like a Groundhog's Day for the past 40, 50 years? That's done. That's over with. There's a great big world out of here. There's a great big beautiful tomorrow every single day that comes before us. And I hate seeing so many young, bright Roma trash it because they're chasing the next high. It's horrible. It's horrible. And the fact that I have to mention this in a very professional setting is disgusting. In my opinion, I am disgusted. But at the same time, I am hopeful that this new generation of Roma, and the Roma that do exist that hear this, take a moment to really take stock in who they are and feel happy that they're Rom, and understand that there is power in being Rom, because we feel things and we experience things completely different than a lot of other Gaja, and we have the upper hand. Whether you believe it or not, we have the upper hand. So be strong, be proud, be Rom.
Well, those are beautiful words.
Took them from Kevin.
Yeah. Thank you all for joining us on our last episode of Verda Darano. And as always, I'll leave you with this. Gia kor mangav tuke baktalotrom preko tunyaripe. Until then, I wish you safe travels through the darkness.
This broadcast of Verda Darano was brought to you by the talents of Pearson Raquel Horvath, creators of Dead Scared Entertainment, with the help of Piroshka Raj. You've been listening to a production from Dead Scared Entertainment, where terror is our tradition. Good night.